It's Friday on Daily Delivery. I am Michael Rand, happy to be back for another day. Hope everybody's having a great day out there today. Get outside, man. 75 degrees today in mid-March. Doesn't get any better than that. And then we're going to get some storms, some cold, so enjoy it while we can. Enjoy the show while we can. Good one coming up. Ben Goessling from the Tribune joins me here in just a couple minutes to talk Vikings, all sorts of things in play, the things we know, which is a lot of reshuffling on the offensive line and defensive line, most of them good things coming for the Vikings. Some intrigue still, though, with Aaron Rodgers. That story has not gone away. Rodgers still hasn't signed anywhere else. The Vikings still haven't signed a veteran backup for J.J. McCarthy. Are they in the market for the 41, soon-to-be next season, 42-year-old quarterback, or will this just all dissipate in the next 24 to 48 hours with him signing in Pittsburgh with the Giants, something like that? Hey, as long as it's happening, we got to talk about it. And Ben says there is at least a chance. The Vikings have not closed that door. So he and I will get into that in addition to many other things here in just a minute. We'll get to some additional Vikings transactions at the end of the show, as well as the Wild's inability still to score goals, even though they are hanging in there standings-wise. First, though, what did I miss? Day 2 of digesting the Ben Johnson firing. Gophers head coach, men's basketball coach, let go after 4 seasons. Looking at it objectively, Marcus Fuller had an interesting kind of lay of the land of who the Gophers, Mark Coyle, might look to hire in Johnson's place. And I found it interesting, because I like lists like that. So I went through it. Niko Medved, the Colorado State head coach, appears at the top of this list. We'll get back to him in a minute. You've got Porter Moser, the Oklahoma coach. Don't know about that one with the huge $8.3 million buyout. Darian DeVries, West Virginia coach. Again, another huge buyout. Don't know if they have the appetite for that. Ben McCollum from Drake. He's a hot commodity. A lot of people looking at him, maybe even Indiana. His buyout, not so bad. Probably. We don't know that for sure. He's at a private university, but a smaller school. Ryan Saunders, former Minnesota Timberwolves head coach, now an assistant with the Nuggets. No buyout there, which is interesting, but he's only 38, has not coached at the college level as a head coach, so that's an interesting one to maybe follow. Ben Jacobson, Northern Iowa, we've heard of him for a while, and Dave Yorger from the Milwaukee Bucks, former NBA head coach and now an assistant coach, I said, with the Bucks. He was a head coach at 2 different stops, Memphis and Sacramento, so some names to consider there. But going back to Medved, the head coach at Colorado State, he's got ties to the Gophers, former assistant coach here, knows Dave Thorson very well, has taken Colorado State to NCAA tournament in 2022 and 2024, has a $4 million buyout roughly, could command a decent salary, but could be in their salary range. And they're having a good year this year, 16-4 in the conference and, second place right now. However, find it interesting to look at the top of those conference standings, the top of the Mountain West Conference standings. In first place in the Mountain West, New Mexico. Head coach of New Mexico, yes, that would be Richard Pitino, the coach that Mark Coyle fired 4 years ago, and a guy who I am here to say right now might have been the ideal coach for the last 4 years in this transition to the NIL transfer era, and who might be a hot candidate, who is a hot candidate to be a head coach elsewhere in this cycle. Pitino's Lobos this season, 26-6 overall, 17-3 in the regular season Mountain West standings. They just won their Mountain West quarterfinal tournament game over San Jose State on Thursday, so they're into the semifinals, projected right now as a number 9 seed in the NCAA tournament, so feel like they're pretty safe. They would probably feel better if they won their conference tournament, but you would think that that could be a too big, at least, conference if they lose, and they're maybe 2 or 3. So they're in good shape right now to be back-to-back NCAA tournament-bound team. The Gophers, of course, not in the NCAA tournament all 4 years of Ben Johnson's tenure, including this season, which they finished below 500 overall, never finished above 500 in the Big Ten. Now, again, this is revisionist history. Richard Pitino, when he was fired 4 years ago, I think most of us were on board with that. We understood why he couldn't get that program to a certain level. It had stalled out after 8 seasons. He had gone to the NCAA tournament a couple times, but it just didn't feel like things were really ratcheting up for the Gophers in that space. However, that was a much different era of college basketball. The era that has followed, this era of open transfers with the transfer portal, no sitting out, this era of NIL money. Recruiting has changed considerably. Richard Pitino, basically at New Mexico, has taken an NIL transfer portal approach. I don't know exactly how much money they have to spend there, but he is basically saying high school recruiting is no longer the lifeblood of a college basketball program. He's taking in a lot of transfers. He did that here already before when he was here, found creative ways to get guys in on waivers, stuff like that, but sometimes they had to sit out, things like that. But he got guys in here before. He would have gotten guys in here right now. He has rebuilt New Mexico in a different kind of way, in a different kind of style that probably would have been more conducive to the last 4 years. Yes, I know Ben Johnson had some success in the transfer portal, gets Dawson Garcia in. Elijah Hawkins was a transfer, but then they couldn't keep some of these guys. I understand there's more to it, and maybe Richard Pitino would have struggled with the same sorts of resource questions that Ben Johnson struggled with. But what I'm saying is his philosophy, his connections, his understanding of the working of the portal, and a philosophy of how to build a roster might have been better suited. And now he's done that with New Mexico. He is a hot coaching commodity, rumored to be perhaps the leading candidate at Virginia this season. The leading candidate at Virginia. Virginia, a program that was down for a long time, but then had a huge resurgence under former coach Tony Bennett. He unexpectedly retired before this season. They won a national championship in 2019. Now we're talking about the former Gophers coach, Richard Pitino, who wasn't good enough to stay here, being mentioned as a candidate to take over a program that won a national championship just 6 years ago. That is how much higher his stock is now. He's definitely in kind of that hiring cycle right now. Any coaching openings right now, except, of course, for Minnesota's. That would be a wild kind of turn of events. But any kind of coaching hires right now, he is in the conversation for those. So interesting turnabout right now, how he could, he's kind of the ideal candidate for this era. If you go to a place and you've got more resources, like there's going to be projected to be next season, he can be a very good, effective coach in getting guys into his system quickly, integrating players in, getting them to play right away. So I think that's an interesting kind of thing to consider. Not that it was wrong when they fired him 4 years ago, because I think a lot of us considered that to be the right move at the time. But how things have worked out in the last 4 years, I would have thought maybe, hey, Richard Pitino might have been a better guy for the job during these last 4 years, and he certainly is right now. Let's talk Vikings today with Star Tribune writer Ben Goessling. It's been a busy week, Ben. I want to get into everything we know in just a minute, but there's one thing we still don't know yet. But first, it's one thing we still don't know yet. The Vikings have seemingly constructed a very intentional bridge to J.J. McCarthy, where it looks like now they are ready to hand things over to the second-year quarterback. However, Ben, are they still intrigued by doing a little bit of their own research on how to complete this plan? Is there anything to this Aaron Rodgers smoke that we've been kind of gathering this week?
I would say there is at least enough intrigue to not close the door on it. Everybody that I've talked to about it is not willing to say there's no chance of it happening. And the hedge is, what does Rodgers want to do? Does he want to come somewhere where he's not the long-term? I mean, he can't be anybody's long-term solution at this point, but what does this mean for competition? I don't think he's going somewhere where he has to compete for a job at all. And I don't know what promises the Vikings would make him, but I will say this. What I know is there is enough willingness to talk about this in from an organizational level for the Vikings that nobody is closing the door to this happening. It's the question always with Aaron Rodgers of, is the juice worth the squeeze? And there's a fair amount of squeeze at this point with Aaron Rodgers, where you got to put up with whatever he's going to say on Pat McAfee, whatever he feels about the offseason program in terms of how much he's going to be there, how involved he's going to be, how he's going to relate to his receivers. I think all of that would be a question. Does Justin Jefferson want to play with him? I mean, maybe Justin Jefferson would be very intrigued by it, but then there's the other part of it where 4 MVPs played the position at as high of a level in every sense of the word: mobility, accuracy, arm talent, downfield arm, capabilities, the hard counts, the catching people with 12 on the field, all of that kind of stuff. Nobody has done this at this high of a level, with the possible exception, I think, of Patrick Mahomes. So there's a lot to like if you're getting that version of Aaron Rodgers. And I think the question is, would they? And how long would he want it? How long would they want to be committed to him? If it's a year, I think you can make that argument. If it's longer than that, is JJ McCarthy going to start to say, you know what, I'm not terribly crazy about where this is lining up? So there's a lot to figure out with this. But from my understanding, he is fond of what they've done. He's fond of how Kevin O'Connell goes about things. He certainly sees the amount of talent here. I think all of those things are real. And I think they are saying, you know what? If we could make it work, let's at least talk about it. I don't know that it's going to happen. I think Pittsburgh still makes more sense, but nobody has slammed the door on this. So it's worth watching, at least for now, and maybe for a while, because Aaron Rodgers may take some time before he emerges from the darkness, so to speak, on this and makes a decision.
Yeah, and they could slam the door. They could easily say, no, we're not interested, move on. So that's telling that they haven't done that publicly or privately. The bigger, one question for me is, here's a guy who's going to turn 42 during this season. This is not, Favre came here and had a very good year. That was his age. He turned 40 in the middle of that season. 40 and 42 aren't terribly far apart, but there's still a certain gap there. And also,
I'm 11 months older than him. I am very aware of how quick it changes.
That's very true. And you look at this too, is like Aaron Rodgers' last 3 seasons haven't been good. His last year in Green Bay was not very good. Then he had the torn Achilles year in New York, and then his last year in New York, like statistically, it came out okay, but if you look at his QBR, it was way down. Like he's not the same quarterback that you remember, and he's pretty far removed from that now. The last time he was elite, which again, his elite was extremely elite because he won back-to-back MVPs, but the last time he was elite was 2021, which was 4 years ago. That's a long time. So I'm wondering, like, not just is it worth it from the baggage standpoint or from the culture standpoint, but can this guy even still play? Is he still a better quarterback than JJ McCarthy even?
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of the question, because we saw him play the Vikings in London last year, and there were moments in that game where it's like, okay, that's still Aaron Rodgers. He's had some throws in that game where it's like, yep, that's the guy we've seen for years. But the thing that's changed, at least by my lights, is it's not as frequent as it was. There's still those moments, but it's not all of the time where he's making those things happen. He's not as mobile. The extending plays and throwing darts on those post routes that he used to hit to Jordy Nelson and Devontae Adams all the time, that's not quite the same. And he is, I don't think, quite as able to just get away from pressure. I mean, he's like a lot of these quarterbacks. I think everybody talks about this. You saw it with Favre. I think you saw, Tom Brady was pretty good at avoiding it. But if you play the game a certain way, you expose yourself to more hits. And over the years, older quarterbacks don't like getting hit as much because it hurts and you just don't recover from those things as quickly. So I think a lot of that is a valid question. Is he going to be better than JJ McCarthy by enough to say all that comes with it, whatever message it might send to JJ McCarthy, whatever message it might send about where they are going, is all of that worth it? And then the other thing you have to ask, though, is what message do you want to send to your locker room? Because this is a team coming off a 14-win season. Do they feel good enough about McCarthy to turn it over to him? I think they're very excited about where he's at physically. I think they're very excited about his progress. But excited about progress and saying this guy can take the keys to a 14-win team and lead us to the Super Bowl in 2025 are different questions. So I think a lot of that stuff is why this is a complicated conversation, because they do have to figure out what are the trade-offs here. Who are we sort of, which feathers are we ruffling if we do this? And is all of it going to be worth it? Because it is a big undertaking if you're going to do it. I think you go in with your eyes as open as they get. And, you know, there's this idea I've heard a little bit of like, well, if he comes in here, he'll fit into the culture and he'll be kind of willing to work with what the Vikings have. It's like, maybe, but do we have a lot of experience or a lot of history to say that he kind of just goes along to get along? I don't think we do. I think, in fact, he's quite proud of being an enigma, was it? So, you know, I don't think that just getting along with the program is something that he is particularly fond of doing. You know, if he buys into it, that's one thing, but it's a little bit of you got to sell me on it. So it would be a sell job from them on a lot of levels. And it would be very, very interesting to see how everybody manages that if, in fact, it did happen.
Selfishly, there would be a lot of downloads and clicks involved. I would appreciate that. I've written a lot about Aaron Rodgers over the years.
You have?
As a member of the Vikings, I'm kind of our foremost chronicler of that outside of the people who cover the Vikings. The one thing I do come back to, and I was always like this with Favre until he retired, until he was like 5 years retired. It's like, is he coming back? I don't know. If you ask yourself point blank, what quarterback out there right now do you look at and say, man, if everything breaks right, and he catches it just right, he could take you to a Super Bowl. I do say Aaron Rodgers, but that's probably the temptation, right? Like you look at it and you say, if this guy is as good as he could be, or 80% or 90% of as good as he's ever been, he's probably the best quarterback out there.
That's true. I mean, that is the temptation. Is this does not have to work for 10 years or 5 or even 3. It has to work for 1. And they have enough pieces. There's
pieces are in place.
Pieces are in place. We'll go with it. There's enough of that they could probably talk themselves into it from that perspective. And you know, these owners lived this once before. They lived the high of it, and then they lived the, shall we say, deflating backside of it the next year when Favre came back for 2010. Everything went terribly. The Metrodome collapsed. Brad Childress got fired. Leslie Frazier took over. I mean, Kevin O'Connell would not be in that situation. No. Kevin O'Connell, I think, has a lot more equity built up at this point than Childress did. But, you know, Childress got fired the year after an NFC title game run. So there is a lot of this stuff that you have to discuss with him. And your hunches and your evaluations of him have to be right. Because if they're not, there could be a major cost to doing it.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. We will see. Intriguing. They've done a lot of stuff already that's not speculative. Let's talk about their upgrades first and foremost on the offensive and defensive lines, things that we were forecasting those. We were expecting this, but what do you think of what they've done so far? What do these moves signal to you?
Well, I think they realized that these positions could not be avoided any longer. And they really, at guard, Andrew Kramer and I have talked about this a little bit on Access Vikings. We've kind of gone down memory lane of all of the different guards that we've seen in our time on this beat, because it's been a problem just about every year. I mean, I'm heading into year 14. Andrew's heading into year 13. And we talk about guards. I mean, you know this. We talk about this on Access Vikings all the time. Yeah. We talk about the guard position a lot. We talk about the offensive line a lot. So I think they realized this cannot be fixed on the cheap. It can't be fixed saying, let's get a late round draft pick that we try to develop. Let's get even a first rounder that, kind of comes along, and there's that learning curve that exists at that position because they play so differently at college. It was, we need to go out and spend significant money on an upgrade at this spot. So Will Fries, I think, is a guy that made a lot of sense. He was the guy that I picked in our kind of play GM free agent exercise beforehand. I said, this is the guy they should go after. He's big. He's a former tackle. He's a good pass protector. Brian O'Neill has not had somebody like this next to him his entire time here. He's played through played with a different right guard just about every year. In fact, it may be one more right guard than years he's been here. So stability over there is important, and I think it also helps that Will Fries comes in with Ryan Kelly, who is his center from Indianapolis, probably a better player or a higher level player than Garrett Bradbury has been in his career. Kelly's had injuries. He's in his 30s. I think there's a lot of questions there too, but at least from a short-term perspective, I like that move. I like, the fact that those two have worked together. There's no question about, can they pass off stunts? Can they handle all of those types of things together? Because they've done it before. So I like those moves. And then the defensive line moves, I think, were important as well, because you've seen a lot of times the last couple of years where they don't play many defensive linemen. And I think part of that is they've said, we don't have difference makers on the field. Let's go play a lot of these edge rushers and run these sets where it's 4 or 5 linebackers and then nickel, and then there's maybe 1 or 2 defensive linemen, because they just don't have those types of guys, especially on passing downs. I mean, Harrison Phillips started off the year decently in terms of his pass rush last year, better than we've probably seen, but went very, very quiet. I think like 3 pressures the last 7 or 8 games of the season. So getting Allen, getting Hargrave should change some of those things. Again, these guys are on the wrong side of 30. They're not probably going to be your long-term answers, but they don't need them to be. They need an upgrade now, and then you develop some of these things and get the next wave of guys ready through the draft process. Jalen Redmond probably takes a step forward in year 2. So it was, I think, a realization that they can't ignore these things any longer, because they have not invested in that position in the draft at defensive tackle, and really at guard, they haven't done it either. So saying we have money to spend while we have a cheap quarterback cost, let's go out and just get guys who have proven they can do it at this level. I think it made a lot of sense. I think every indication we had ahead of time was this is something they were going to prioritize. And so far, we've seen them do it with a lot of money backed into those positions.
And they, some of this is an admission that, it wasn't like Garrett Bradbury was just drafted yesterday, but he was a first-round pick. Ed Ingram was a second-round pick at guard. It's not like they haven't invested anything in the offensive line. I know it's been a little while, but it's an admission that those picks just didn't work. And one of them was their own pick. One of them was an inherited pick. But they have invested in the offensive line. The ones that have basically paid off the most were the tackles, as Darisaw and Brian O'Neill. Where's Darisaw, by the way, in his kind of journey? Is he expected to be back for week 1 this season, or where's that kind of at?
Well, I think they are hopeful on his progression. I think the possibility of being back for training camp is certainly in the cards. Okay, but I still think they probably will go out and get some other help there, because I don't think you want to go in assuming that a guy coming off of an ACL is automatically going to be ready to go right away, and you don't need a backup plan. That could be Walter Rouse. That could be David Questenberry is still somebody they could bring back. Okay, I could see something like that, but I also wonder if they will look at another tackle at some point to just give themselves another option. So, yeah, I think a lot of that is they're cautiously optimistic, but you still have to figure those things out. But you're right on the investments, because we used to nail them for this every year, where they had not, and the stat was always not since Phil Lodeholt had they used a first or a second round pick on a lineman. And then it's O'Neill, it's Bradbury, it's Darisaw within a stretch of 4 years. So they did make the investments, and Ingram comes right after that with the new regime. So 4 times really in 5 years where they use a first or second round pick on those spots. And they hit on the tackles.
I think Ezra Cleveland was in the middle of that.
You're right. Yes, Ezra Cleveland was a second round pick as well. And Ezra Cleveland was a guard. So really 5 times in those 5 years, right? Because O'Neill, Bradbury, Cleveland, Darisaw, and Ingram. Yep. So it has been an investment in the draft, but you'd say the tackles hit, but the guards probably not. And Cleveland came in as a tackle and then moved to guard. So the interior investments have not worked, and they've, I think, finally said, let's try a different approach here.
The secondary is interesting. We learned, I guess it was late Wednesday, Harrison Smith is coming back for a 14th season, but still played at a very good level last season. I think he's got plenty left, and he likes playing for Brian Flores, so that's good for them. It kind of seemed like their calculations in the earliest part of free agency were knowing that he was probably coming back, because you let Cam Bynum walk. You bring back, you sign Theo Jackson to kind of like a modest deal, but it looks like he might be in line for a little playing time bump. You bring in a couple corners. It doesn't quite feel like they're done yet, though, in the secondary. The safety feels better, but it doesn't quite feel like they're done yet at corner, whether that's through the draft or free agency.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think you still need investments at that position. Byron Murphy being back, I think, is a big deal.
Yes.
They are optimistic about Mekhi Blackmon, but he's coming off an ACL. I still think there's a need for at least just one more, maybe more than that. I do think, as much as we, kind of chuckled about that at the time when they added Mike Hughes, the overall philosophy of you can never have enough corners that Mike Zimmer espoused, I think is right.
Yeah.
And Brian Flores, what we saw in training camp last year too, when they just started signing guys left and right, I think Brian Flores believes that as well. So yes, I would expect that there's still another corner coming at some point. They did add Isaiah Rodgers too. So,
right.
That'll be interesting to see how that goes. But Isaiah Rodgers is not a big guy. He's like 5'9". He can fly. He was like a 4.2 something 40 at the combine, or I think at his pro day coming out. But, not the big physical man cover corner that you typically associate with what Brian Flores' defenses are and what they started to go back to more of at the end of last season. We did see them shift more to man coverage after saying they wanted to do it and kind of starting the year playing more, kind of that off zone kind of stuff. So I think there's probably a need for another one there. I think the safety position is in better shape. Bynum getting the deal he got, great for him. They weren't going to match that. Theo Jackson, they have liked over the last couple of years, so he probably plays more. And you can keep Metellus in kind of that rover role that you've played in the last few years with Harrison Smith coming back. So, I think a corner makes some sense. I think, help at wide receiver on the other side of the ball probably makes some sense. But otherwise, you could get another running back and then you need a quarterback. But a lot of the big needs have been taken care of. There's depth things to do. Maybe some of those guys you bring back, but a lot of the major needs have been addressed.
Do you think they bring in yet another guard, or do you think they feel like they've got enough internal options to that, feeling good about 4 of the spots makes it so you don't need to go out and spend a lot more there?
Yeah, I'll be curious to see how that goes. I could see an argument both ways. I could see them saying, let's go spend because Blake Brandel was fine, but, struggled at the end of the season. I could also see them saying it was his first year. The rest of the group is better or will be better than it was, especially with a new center there. I wonder if they'll just say, let's stick with Brandel. He's signed for a 3-year deal. He's a big enough guy that they don't worry about giving up size there. So I will be curious to see where that goes. I think there would be an argument to be made for getting somebody else in there, but they also like Walter Rouse. And I think Walter Rouse could be a guard before it's all said and done, and probably will get more time there this year. So they have some other options there, but I also wouldn't be shocked if they said, let's just do a little more to ensure that this is not a problem. Because if it, whether it's, let's say it's McCarthy, let's say it's Rodgers, there's other options, other solutions for this, but let's say it's either of those guys, whether it's a 42-year-old quarterback or a first-year starter that is still very new at this, that's coming off
half
of an injury. Yes, pretty much half his age. Certainly could be his kid, pretty plausibly. So either way, you don't want an offensive line that's an issue. You don't want your older quarterback getting hit, or you don't want your younger one having to run for his life and kind of learn the position that way. Because when you hear them talk about ruining quarterbacks, one of the easiest ways to ruin a quarterback is to have a bad offensive line in front of him where he's just having to, play on the run all the time. So I think there's a lot of benefit to saying, let's figure this out. The other thing I'm curious about is what happens with Garrett Bradbury. I think you hold on to him for now. He could be a trade chip. There are teams that need centers. The Seahawks are one of the teams that probably needs a center, and they could send Sam Darnold's center from last year out there in a trade, or you say, let's keep him. And he played a little guard in college. I don't know that he's a guard in the NFL, especially if we're worried about the size thing. But do you hang on to him as an insurance policy? They'd also save like $3.5 million if they cut him. So my understanding there is that all options are still on the table with him. And that one's just going to be kind of interesting to watch how that happens, because they know what they like about him. They know what they don't like about him. And, the price point of it will be interesting to see what they find for a solution there.
The quarterback room emptied out in a hurry. It was crowded with 5 guys in it towards the end of last year after they signed Daniel Jones. But Jones goes to Indianapolis. Our old friend Nick Mullins goes to Jacksonville. And, of course, the big one, Sam Darnold, going to Seattle. Were you not surprised but necessarily by any of these moves, but we can take them one by one?
Yeah.
Are you surprised at all about the terms of Darnold? 3 years, 155 guaranteed. I felt that felt a little bit light to me by the end, but maybe that's just indicative of where the market was and people kind of like still being a little bit in wait and see mode based on just one good year and how it ended.
Yeah, I think there was uncertainty about him. I heard a little bit at the combine where it's how the year ended. And then it's also how much of this was because of all the advantages he had in Minnesota. When you have Kevin O'Connell, kind of walking him through things, I think to an extent, you have that degree of coaching, whether it's Josh McCown, Grant Udinski, Wes Phillips, who was a quarterback in college. There are enough layers of coaching in Minnesota where it's easier for a quarterback to operate, I think. And then you have all of those weapons to work with. So I think there's some question about teams that needed a quarterback saying, well, we don't have as many things going for us as Minnesota did. Are we going to be able to get the same thing out of him that they did? And then, it is hard to unsee those last 2 games. And I think he ends up with a deal that puts him like 18th in the league in terms of average annual value, which is, he was better than the 18th best quarterback in the league last year, but I think the questions about him probably still depressed that market. So, I think that was all kind of baked into the valuation that the Seahawks came up with, and probably his too, because if he took that deal saying, this is probably the best I'm going to be able to do, I think that probably tells you where his camp saw everything lining up as well.
He still cashed in, and Seattle will be interesting because, they trade away one of his best receivers right away, and DK Metcalf. So how does that work out for him? But they've still got options out there, still got possibilities, but that will be interesting to see as well. Ben Goessling, appreciate the time as always. Hoping for a quieter little stretch here until something else happens, but you never know. We'll be on it if it happens, right, Ben?
Yes, Mike, it's the Vikings. You never know. So we kind of just operate in the stay ready so you don't have to get ready mindset this time of year.
Awesome. Thanks, Ben.
All right. Thanks, Mike.
Open a smart checking account at Royal Credit Union to get no monthly fees, no minimum balance, and a $250 bonus. See details at rcu.org/checking bonus. No minimum balance required to obtain bonus. Offer ends 5/31/25. Insured by NCUA.
Great stuff from Ben. As always, follow his work, Star Tribune, StarTribune.com. The danger this time of year of recording a segment in advance a little bit. I tend to record these interviews the day before the podcast is going to go live. Otherwise, I'd be asking guys to get up way too early in the morning like I do to record these things, except for Royce on Mondays. We always do that right away Monday mornings. But most of these happen, 12 to 24 hours in advance. We're hoping nothing much changes. Usually, I try to pick topics where things aren't going to change too much, but Vikings free agency is too good of a topic, but also things in flux. I'm worried for the last 12, 24 hours. Is something going to happen in the Aaron Rodgers saga that's going to make me have to spike an entire 10 minutes of conversation? Well, no, nothing has happened yet. He's still out there. Vikings still haven't signed another quarterback. The Giants, the Steelers, nobody has signed Aaron Rodgers yet, so that story is still intact. However, the Vikings made a flurry of moves on the offensive line that kind of changed a little bit of the structure of kind of some of the secondary stuff that Ben and I talked about. First, they traded Ed Ingram for a 6th-round pick in 2026 to the Houston Texans, recouping a little bit of value, I guess, for a guy who no longer fit into their plans. 2nd-round pick back in 2022, that ill-fated 2022 draft. Lewis Seen, Andrew Booth Jr., Ed Ingram, Brian Asamoah, none of those guys really panning out to the level they thought they would, to say the least. So that chapter is closed on Ed Ingram. They at least recoup some value there. They are trying to do the same thing with Garrett Bradbury, we are reporting. If they can't trade him, they're just going to flat out release him to save some cap space, although they will eat a little bit of dead money this year as well. That made possible by all the upgrades they've made already on the offensive line. So Garrett Bradbury's tenure looks like it will come to a close with the Vikings. And again, another miss, not one for this regime. A guy that stuck around for a long time, so it's not like they haven't gotten any useful production out of him, but a first-round pick in 2019 and a guy who never just really turned the corner or really had the size to play the position, and that part of it is certainly disappointing if you are a Vikings fan. And the Vikings added, depth, maybe a swing tackle, offensive line transaction. Justin Skule, formerly of the Buccaneers, 66 career games, 17 starts over 5 seasons. So a guy who certainly has experience, a guy who can play. Insurance against Christian Darrisaw's injury as he's coming back from that, insurance for anything else that happens at tackle. So more depth at tackle. So they're certainly stocking up on the offensive line, making transitions from what they had last season. Not a surprise based on how they ended last season, but things are in flux, certainly, for the Vikings. Let's finish with the cooler. Wild lose 3-2 in overtime at home to New York. The Rangers had a 2-1, had a 1-0 and 2-1 lead on the Wild. The Wild was able to rally with a couple of power play goals, tie this thing up, at least get a point, but they lose in overtime. That is the 8th time in their last 9 games that the Wild have failed to score more than 2 goals in regulation. They have been in a scoring drought of epic proportions. 2 goals yesterday, 1 regulation goal in the game before that, 1 before that, 1 before that, 4 against Seattle, an outburst before that, and then 1-2, 1-2. Before that, it was 3-6, but then back to 2-0 and 0. So they are struggling to score right now in the absence of Kirill Kaprizov and the absence now of Joel Eriksson-Ek. Just having a hard time putting the puck in the net, trying to grind this thing to the finish line, get into the playoffs, winning ugly, winning with all these low event games, but also losing a lot of these games too. This is 6. Those last 9 games, they have 3 wins, 1 overtime loss, and 5 regulation losses, slipping in the standings, still in comfortable playoff position, but I'm sure they're looking at that calendar saying, hurry up, hurry up, hurry up. They've played 66 games this year. That means 16 are left. Can they squeeze out just enough points in these low event games to make it to the postseason? Probably. Their postseason projections are still pretty rosy at this point. If you're looking at them objectively, Hockey Reference gives them about a 95% chance of getting into the playoffs. Still very good. So still in that mix. I think that's, that would be a win from where they started this season. I don't think a lot of people had them as that likely to make the playoffs when the season started. Maybe more unlikely to make the playoffs, kind of where they sat. Didn't make it last year. Trying to still kind of get through this last season of the buyout penalties of Suter and Parisi. So it's been a good year objectively. The injuries have caught up to them. Can they get it to the finish line? They're just having such a hard time scoring lately. Can they get enough goaltending, enough defense, enough scoring to make it to the finish line? That's what I'll be watching for the rest of this year. That will do it for me today. Should be great stuff coming up next week. Royce will talk about plenty of stuff, including the Ben Johnson firing. I'm sure with Royce next week, he's got some strong opinions. Doesn't think it was a good decision by Mark Coyle. He wrote that for Friday's paper, FridayStarTribune.com. Plenty of other stuff to get to next week as well. Until then, I am Michael Rand. Have a great rest of your Friday. Back at it again on Monday.